Again, my name is Wendy Newton. I am going to be presenting today with Amy Patterson, and she'll take over a little bit farther along in the presentation. So I'm going to turn my video off right now and proceed with our presentation on updates to Safe Schools reports relating to special education. Okay, so again, Amy Patterson with the Office of Special Education and Early Learning will be presenting along with myself, and I'm with the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support. Carol Ann Morrison is also online to answer any program-related questions regarding special education, and she is also with the Office of Special Education and Early Learning. So we're just going to go over a few of the common things regarding the Safe Schools report and behavior data entry changes that have come along this summer that you need to be aware of, and things that we need to do to close out the 1920 school year and start the 2021 school year. So the Safe Schools report, that data was verified by your superintendent and your director of special education for the 1920 data as of June 30th. Today, I sent out an email letting Safe Schools administrators know that the data is now loaded into the school report card secure site. So that's one of the things that this data is used for, again, is the school report card, and that'll be released publicly in the fall. The report is, or the data is also used to create a Safe Schools annual statistical report that is required to be submitted to the Office of Education Accountability and the Kentucky Center for School Safety by the end of August of each school year. And we also use this data for IDEA purpose, special education purposes, for federal reporting. And Amy will go over that some later in the session. So some of the updates for Safe Schools, very important updates for Safe Schools, is a slight change in the definition of in-school removal, which really kind of took effect last year, but is going to be mandated, of course, for 2021 school year, which would be a removal from students' regular educational setting, even during non-instructional time. And there'll be a slide that will explain that. We're also going to go over the new state code named InDistrict Removal, or INDR. We're going to have a little bit of information also on the Interim Alternative Educational Setting State Resolution, which is abbreviated as IAES. We're going to also in this session talk to you about some changes that have occurred with the resolution length calculations when the data is entered in behavior management and how it's calculated on the Safe Schools report. And then Amy is also going to go over some great changes that we've seen with the data visualization tools for behavior. So that's kind of the updates for what we're going to be covering in this session today. So state resolutions. The first thing you need to know is, what is a disciplinary removal? So this is an instance in which a child is removed from his or her educational placement for disciplinary purposes. So that could be including in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, expulsions, removal by school personnel, or removal by a hearing officer to an interim alternative educational setting. The state resolutions that are in place within Infinite Campus, most of these are very familiar to you guys. The SSP1 is expelled with services. SSP2 is expelled without services. And please note that this resolution should not be used for a student with an IEP. We still, when we're reviewing data in the summer, we still find instances in which special education students have been assigned a expelled without services. Usually that's a selection by mistake, and that can be corrected, but you definitely, that is not allowed. SSP3 is out of school suspension, and SSP5 is corporal punishment. I wanted to make a real quick note about corporal punishment. We've been reaching out to districts. If corporal punishment is not part of your board policy or allowed in board policy, then you need to end date that resolution in your IC district database. And we've reached out to most districts and have had that completed this year. I think there's still a few that's still kind of hanging out there that we need to work with, but definitely, unless it's part of your board policy, this resolution needs to be indated in Infinite Campus. The other one is SSP7, physical restraint, then SSP8, seclusion, in-school removal, and then INDR, in-district removal. That's the new one for this school year. IAES1 and IAES2, those are unilateral removals by school personnel or hearing officers. So in-school removal, this is the complete definition. It's a removal from the student's regular educational program or setting for disciplinary purposes to another program or setting within the same school. That's the key there, within the same school. And the regular educational program or setting encompasses the school day and includes instructional time, lunch, recess, and study periods. So that would pull in your non-instructional time. I won't go through all the examples, but just keep in mind the key here too is within the same school. So if the student has a behavior incident, they're enrolled in the high school and they're sent to another classroom within that same school, then that should be a local resolution that's mapped to the state resolution of in-school removal. This is our new one, in-district removal. So this is going to be those that there's a removal from the student's regular school to an off-site alternative program or another school for disciplinary purposes. The student will continue to receive educational and IEP services and remain under direct supervision of district personnel. So in this example, this would be a resolution that's used when a student is at the high school and they're sent because of a behavior event to an off-site alternative program in another building, another school, or they could even be sent to another A1 school, the other high school that has an alternative setting. If the student is removed from their school, then this is a local resolution that should be mapped to the in-district removal. And I know we may have questions about this at the end, and we can address those. So sticking with in-district removal just for a few minutes, we sent instructions out last week. Actually, it was the 1st of July, letting districts know about this new state mapping and giving instructions. So basically, by the beginning of the school year, districts should review all their local resolutions in Infinite Campus to see if they meet the definition of any of our state resolutions, and if so, they should be mapped appropriately. If you have a local resolution already created for alternative placement or alternative school or in-school removal that actually places the student to another school, then that currently it's probably mapped to in-school removal, but that one will need to be updated to in-district removal. So if you have one already existing, it is very important that you end date the existing local resolution that's mapped to in-school removal with an end date of 6/30/2020 and create a new local resolution created and mapped to the in-district removal state code. So that's really important. It's really important if you have an existing one that you end date the existing and create a new one, because that way your prior year reporting will not be affected by the change. So if your district does not have an existing local resolution code for off-site alternative placement, and that is something that your district does do, then you will need to create a new local resolution with a start date of 7/1/2020 and map it to in-district removal state code. I anticipate questions again on in-district removal, but we're going to move on now to the older codes that have always been in the system and kind of go over those briefly for new people. But SSP1 is expelled with services, and the definition is the removal of a student from his or her school for disciplinary reasons that result in the withdrawal of the student from the school of attendance for up to 1 year. Expulsion criteria has to be defined by the local Board of Education and be in the local board policy. Students must be provided regular educational services and IEP related services. One note for special education students: when a student with an IEP is expelled, the ARC, or the Admissions and Release Committee, must meet to determine how the special education and related services in the IEP will be provided during the expulsion period. SSP2 is expelled without services, and the definition is the removal of a student from school for disciplinary reasons that result in the withdrawal of the student from the school of attendance. Again, the criteria should be set by the local Board of Education, and in this case of expulsion, there are no arrangements made for the provision of educational services. And SSP2 is not allowable for students with disabilities. Out of school suspension, the definition is a student was removed from the regular classroom and from school for a specified duration of time. And during this time, students are usually not receiving educational services. Interim alternative educational setting. We've had a lot of confusion about this over the years. Amy's probably going to go into it a little bit more in detail, but basically these two resolutions should only be used for special education students. There should not be a resolution of interim alternative educational setting on any student that does not have an IEP. IAES1 is unilateral removal by school personnel for drugs, weapons, or serious bodily injury. And IAES2 is a removal by a due process hearing officer due to likely injury to self or others. You can reference the interim alternative educational setting guidance. It gives complete definitions and examples of how and when these very specific resolutions should be used in the schools or the districts. And I think at this time is when I turn it over to Amy. So Amy, if you want to take control and introduce yourself, I will put myself on mute.
Okay, thank you. So I am Amy Patterson. I am the data manager for special education. And Wendy and I have been working very closely together the last couple of years to make sure all of the data is accurate for students with IEPs as well as for students without IEPs. And I'm going to turn off my video now. So one of the things that I want to talk about is the INDR, in-district removal. And that something I need to point out is the way that is going to be looked at by each group, by students. It will be reviewed differently for students with IEPs and for students without IEPs. So I saw a question where they asked if INDR is for all students, and yes, it is. So for students with IEPs, an in-district removal is actually considered an out-of-school removal. And that's the way we've been monitoring it for years. But that's only going to be the way it's reported for federal reporting for students with IEPs, for special education students. For all other reporting, for all of the reporting that goes on the school report card or to the Center for School Safety or to the Office of Educational Accountability, it will be considered an in-school removal. So I know that's a little bit confusing, but we are required by federal guidance to report it as an out-of-school removal. But it's only going to be reported that way for students with IEPs and to the federal government. All other reporting will have INDRs counted as an in-school removal. So I know that's confusing, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have on that. And then also, I just want to kind of reiterate what Wendy said about IAES. There's very specific guidance around this. It's only for drugs, weapons, or serious bodily injury. It can be up to 45 days, no more. And so I encourage you, I highly encourage you to review the reference guidance at the bottom. I will likely be doing a training on this with directors of special education, just because there have been so many questions about it recently, and confusion about it. So I just want to make sure you all just review that. So removals of students with IEPs, just a few things I want to cover and talk about why this is important. A student with a disability who is removed from the student's current placement for more than 10 days, it's important that the student continue to receive services and then also receive whatever additional services need to be provided for the behavior issues. So a functional behavior assessment, a behavioral intervention plan, whatever is needed for the student is what needs to be provided. And after, remember, after a student has been removed for more than 10 days, they still have to receive services, regardless of the situation. If the removal is a change in placement, so if it's an IAES, or if for some reason a change in placement is required, the ARC determines what services are appropriate and where that placement will be. And then for purposes of removal for a student with a disability, a change of placement occurs if the removal has occurred for more than 10 consecutive days, or if a student has been suggested to a series of removals that constitute a pattern. The other thing that comes along with that 10 days is that at the end of those 10 days, a manifestation determination must be required. So the ARC must get together and determine if the conduct that the student has shown is caused by the student's disability or was a result of the student's failure or the school's failure to implement the IEP. If either of those are met, then the behavior must be determined to be a manifestation of the student's disability. If it's not a manifestation of the student's disability, then the school can go ahead and apply whatever disciplinary procedures would have normally occurred for a student without an IEP. So the student still has to receive services, but they can go ahead and have whatever disciplinary actions would occur if the student didn't have an IEP, but only if it is determined to not be a manifestation of the student's disability. If it is a manifestation, then the student needs to have a functional behavioral assessment, a behavior intervention plan put into place if appropriate, and then return to the placement unless the ARC determines otherwise. So I just wanted to cover that just so everybody understands why time is so important when we're talking about students with disabilities. There are federal laws that must be upheld. And honestly, special education is really the only area that looks at time removed. And so something else that Wendy and I have been working on, we've been working on very hard with Infinite Campus, is to be sure that the time that a student removed is accurate. So this is a screenshot of the resolution details, the resolution start date and start time, resolution end date and end time. So when that is put in, that duration and school days in the blue box is calculated now automatically to the 100th of a day based on your school calendar. So that resolution start time, start date and time, resolution end date and time are extremely important that they are accurate, because that time is going to be calculated based on that information. And it will, so no longer do you need to type in the duration in school days. That will be calculated by what's entered for the resolution times. And then we've also been working really hard with the data visualizations to set it up so that the data visualization is going to match what Infinite Campus says. So from this point on to the 100th of a day, the data visualizations will show you exactly the exact time that's listed in Infinite and in the Safe Schools report. So when you go into the Tableau data visualization, you can see a student. You can see, and these should be all different students. They all say fake student, but it should be fake student 1, fake student 2, and so on. So you can see all of the in-school removals, all of the out-of-school removals, and the totals. And you can, if you notice on the right-hand side, on the bottom right, it says total days removed. This defaults to 8 days because we know that people are trying to see which students are getting close to 10. So you can move that down to 0 days or 1 day or whatever, or you can move it up to 10, but it's defaulting to 8 just so you can know which students you need to keep an eye on. You can change the filters so that it's only students that are in special education. You notice about 3 rows up where it says special ed. You can change that to true. Right now it's showing all students, but if you change that to true, it'll only show students with IEPs. So you can just take a look at the students with IEPs. You can filter these all kinds of different ways. You can look at it by race and by gender, all kinds of different things. So we're hoping that this will be helpful to you all in trying to resolve your Safe Schools report and to make sure your data is accurate. And then there's, of course, the Safe Schools report that it was actually due back in June, but I just want to review quickly what we normally are showing people how to review your data. So you're going to run the Safe Schools report, and this is sort of a screenshot of how to do that, which most of you probably know, but I just put it in here. So just so you know the things we're looking at in special education. We're looking at in-school removals. This is how we report them to the federal government. We report numbers of students who have been subject to in-school removal up to 10 days, in-school removal greater than 10 days, out-of-school removal up to 10 days, out-of-school removal greater than 10 days, and count of removal events. And when we're looking at this data in these categories, we're actually looking at significant disproportionality. So we're looking to see, is it disproportionate by race? Are you removing Native American students at a rate of 3 times or more all other students? And it's always 3 times or more that we're looking at. Might be more than 3 times. Are you removing, so we compare Native American to non-Native American, African American to non-African American, white to non-white. And that's how we're comparing it. So it's by race that we're looking at these. If you're determined to have significant disproportionality, and there are other ways you can be considered to have significant disproportionality besides behavior, but behavior is what we're talking about here. Then there are actually financial repercussions there. So you'll have to reserve 15% of your IDEA funds to do early intervening services. So it's important to sort of keep track of that. The other thing we look at is out-of-school removals greater than 10 days, which is called significant discrepancy. And I'm not going to go into that much, but your director of special education can give you information on that if you have questions, or you're welcome to contact me. So when I review this data, after I run the Safe Schools report, then there are several things that I look at, and this is just sort of a checklist of things to look at. The first one is, do you have any SSP4s or SSP6s? Those shouldn't exist. So those need to be removed. SSP2s, if I'm only looking at students with disabilities and I see an SSP2, that's a huge red flag for me, and I'm probably going to contact you. But as Wendy mentioned, most of those are usually mistakes. They usually meant to select INSR or SSP3. So almost always I've found that to be a mistake. IAES1 or IAES2, if they're only a couple of days, that's probably not an accurate IAES. If they're more than 45 days, there's a problem there too, because they're only supposed to go up to 45 days. And then I also review restraint and seclusion. Those are not count. Well, actually, seclusion is counted as a removal. Restraint is not counted as a removal. But I review those just because we need to keep an eye on those mainly. And then resolution start date, resolution end date. Do they occur within the current school year? I've found a lot of times people mess up the year. Especially in December and January, people get confused about what year it is. So they might say they were removed on December 1st, 2000 through December 2nd, 2001. So they were removed the whole year when it was actually just a day. And then same with resolution start times and end times. I often find AM and PM are mixed up a lot. So you just want to make sure those times are reasonable within the school day. Sometimes they won't be within the school day if it's an after school detention, but that's not counted as a removal, so that's okay. Or if it's a restraint, like at the bus stop or something, that won't be within the school day. But again, that's not counted as a removal, so it's okay. And then resolution length, this is the big one. Just take a look at those and make sure they're accurate, because a lot of times, again, if you mess up the date, they may not be accurate. So just take a look at those. For behavior events, take a look at outliers. If it's assault or if it's weapons, are you sure this was a first-degree assault? Are you sure this student, had a firearm? Was that, just make sure it was recorded accurately. And just, if you have any questions, if you have a kindergartner with an Uzi, you might want to go back and double check and make sure the behavior event was accurate. And then, Wendy, do you want to talk about this one?
I don't mind talking about it, but the slide is blank for some reason. So I'm not real sure what I'm talking about.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. So on my
end.
Mine
says aggregate report. Okay, well, I'll talk about it.
Yeah, I'm seeing it too. I'm seeing it okay.
Oh, okay, good.
It's something on my end then. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I'll just do it. So it's the aggregate report. We've put in an aggregate report into the Safe Schools data that will pull the data. It'll provide an aggregate option to sort of roll up and take a look at your data as a whole to help verify accuracy of the Safe Schools data.
Yeah, I can just reiterate on that, even though I can't see the slide, I know what it is. So this aggregate report will help your district and your school administrators to verify the data in the school report card. So basically, this gives you a view from your Infinite Campus database, the aggregates at the school and district level, similar to what you will see when reviewing the school report card. So that's kind of the key of putting that new report type into Infinite Campus under Kentucky State Reporting and then Safe Schools Report. So now you'll see a report option on the landing page that says detail and aggregate, and that's exactly what the aggregate would be used for. One note I want to say really quickly, because I think we're almost out of time, is when you're running your Safe Schools report throughout the year to verify your data, make sure you're running the one that says Safe Schools, not the Safe Schools Historical. That report should not be used prior to or after 1819 reporting.
That's a good point.
Yeah. I'll put myself back on mute, Amy.
Okay.
And as Wendy said, Amy, we are out of time. So if you can wrap up, and then those who had questions, we'll try to get to those later. If not, they'll be in the Q&A document that gets posted.
And I'm on next, and I can make it short. So Wendy has kindly provided instructions for filtering the data. There's a link on here. We talked about reporting, final reminders, and questions. Okay, any questions?
Okay, if you want to take some questions. Wendy, our alternative program is on site at high school. So if we have students at our other schools that attend alternative, then we code that in district, correct? And the high school would be in school removal?
Yes, and I have, while Amy was presenting, went in and answered all questions on Go Soapbox. But yes, that is correct. You would need 2 local resolutions, one for the alternative program for the high school that is mapped to in-school removal, and a second resolution for alternative program for other schools that would be mapped to in-district removal. Because those students at the high school would actually be used as an in-school removal. Any other student that's sent from any other school to the alternative program at the high school would be an in-district removal.
Okay.
I'm looking at Go Soapbox.
So,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
okay, go ahead.
The only one I have a question about that I'm going to need to consult Carol Ann on is the last one. If the alternative school is under the supervision of regular building principals, I think we need to maybe review that question and get an answer out at a later date, because we just need to review and make sure we're all on the same page with that one.